Baby steps.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and I've been sharing a book that I've written called You're Not Broken, Just Rewiring, which highlights my approach to therapy and overall mental health and well-being. Now, these next several chapters make up part 2 of the book, which I think will be especially interesting to those of you here at Infants on Thrones, because I put myself and my Mormon-formed mind under the microscope much more than I did in part 1. Here we explore why and how my brain was wired to find inspiration in channeled material of all places, my own embarrassment and critical approaches to all that, and the science I learned along the way to help me deal with that inner dissonance. Now, while I've pretty much finished my writing of the book, I'm still in the process of adding endnotes to each chapter. And I'm looking for beta readers who would be willing to read the book and offer feedback that I can use for those endnotes. So if you'd like to be one of those beta readers, please reach out to me at infantsonthrones@gmail.com. I'll continue to release these audio-style chapters every other day throughout the month of July and into the first week of August. I hope to have the print version complete with endnotes all ready to publish by the end of August. So that's what we're doing. All right? Now then. Hold on to your hats and glasses.
Cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
Part 2. Interlude. Inspirational Instigators. Is it just me? Or do some parts of you cringe at the same time that other parts quietly cherish? There are parts of me that still feel uneasy sharing what comes next. Not all of me, just the parts shaped by ridicule, trained to scan for what might sound naive or unscientific. Parts formed in response to silence, like sitting across from my dad, asking questions about eternity, and being met with, "Those things have not yet been revealed, so we just shouldn't talk about them." Those experiences didn't just land as disappointments. They imprinted through molecules of emotion. They told my nervous system what was safe to express and what wasn't. Later, as I stepped away from Mormonism, I found relief in secular humanism. Thinkers like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett gave me a framework that felt clean, logical, and sharp, and helped me relate to others in similar ways. But the more I adopted that voice, the more I realized it was mocking something tender in me, something wired for mystery, the part that still lit up, not just emotionally, but biologically, when I read channeled texts like I'll be sharing in this section. It really shouldn't come as much surprise, though, right? Joseph Smith writing the Book of Mormon, isn't that a channeled text that really formed and shaped my early years? There's parts of that I'm still embarrassed about, too. But I'm learning to notice it, to recognize that this internal tension I feel isn't really about belief. It's about neurobiology. My neural pathways were shaped by early spiritual structures, by rhythms of reward, expectation, and meaning. My dopamine system learned to associate spiritual resonance with safety, status, and belonging. My neurotransmitters were conditioned to spike when I encountered something labeled as sacred, and to withdraw when something was dismissed as foolish. This wasn't a flaw, it was a function, and I'm still in the process of rewiring. Writing this book is part of that process, and I'm using myself as a case study, not to preach answers, but to model what it looks like to reflect with curiosity instead of certainty. I still feel the impulse to share what lights me up. I was wired for that too. But now, Instead of preaching a fixed truth, I'm sharing a fluid one, a subjective one, something evolving alongside my own nervous system. So, as you read what follows, notice what stirs in you, what resonates, what resists. You don't have to believe anything I say. Just notice what your body does in response. Because we're not broken, we're rewiring. Always. Chapter 7. Inspiration from the Raw Contact. Is it just me, or do the things that once embarrassed you most sometimes come back as your greatest teachers? That's what happened when I, a recovering Mormon mystic at heart, seeking recovery in secular humanism, stumbled across a channeled text from 1981, The Raw Contact. At first, I wasn't conflicted, I was captivated. It felt like recognition wrapped in surprise, like catching the scent of something deeply familiar in a place you've never been before. I wasn't reluctant, I was ravenous. Because one of the Mormon legacies I carried was a hunger for further light and knowledge. That phrase used to stir something in me, made me believe the universe had layers, secret folds of insight just waiting to be revealed. But in practice, the invitation always came with limits. Every time I tried to push beyond the standard curriculum, I was told to forbear. I remember sitting across from my dad, asking questions about eternity, time as illusion, beginnings before beginnings. He quoted Alma, "These things have not yet been revealed unto me, therefore I shall forbear." And I remember thinking, but I don't want to forbear. I want to explore. That longing never left me. It's the same part of me that loved the TV show Lost, a series of riddles folding into symbols, folding into more riddles. The same part that flipped through the Pearl of Great Price, fixated on the Egyptian symbols, footnoted with, "ought not be revealed unto the world at this time," except when actual Egyptologists read it. But that didn't matter to me then, until it did. But for the longest time, I didn't care if Egyptologists debunked my scripture. The mystery itself was the invitation. So when I discovered the Raw Contact, it didn't feel like a conversion. It felt like permission, a system that didn't say stop. It said, keep going. It gets stranger. Only later did I realize why it felt so familiar. Ra's cosmology echoed the scaffolding I'd been raised with. Cosmic order, eternal progression, a universe made of light, memory, and will, but free from the rigidity of dogma. It wasn't demanding, it was open. The Raw Contact. Back in the early 1980s, a small group of seekers, Don Elkins, a physicist and UFO investigator, Carla Ruckert, a mystic able to surrender deeply into trance, and Jim McCarty, a documentarian of devotion, gathered in a Louisville living room. Carla began channeling a being called Ra, a social memory complex from the sixth density of consciousness. Ra claimed to be a unified intelligence that once lived physical lives on Venus. Yes, Venus, 2.6 billion years ago. As their evolution progressed, their physical forms dissolved, but their consciousness continued to develop. They eventually joined what they described as the Galactic Confederation a coalition of evolved planetary beings supporting younger planets like Earth through their growing pains. According to Ra, Earth is under quarantine, a planet in metaphysical adolescence. They acknowledged the presence of other intelligences visiting Earth and suggested that Earth is not alone. But Ra didn't sound like sci-fi to me. Their tone was calm, precise, non-invasive, respectful of free will above all else. You can listen to the original recordings on YouTube. They're understated. No theatrics, just Carla in trance, and a slow, deliberate rhythm, long pauses between words, as if something was sinking. It was weird, but also hauntingly familiar. The cadence of prophecy, of revelation. Only this time it wasn't about obedience. It was an invitation to wonder, to look inward, to be what you are and understand what that is. Did I believe all of it? No. Some of the questions asked during the sessions felt oddly limited to me. But that critique opened something in me. If I had the chance to ask questions of a being like this, what would I ask? And that imagination became its own portal, a speculative playground that stirred something creative, expansive, dare I say, Arcturian within me. What pulled me in wasn't the channeling, it was the feeling, the way the text bypassed judgment and stirred something ancient, something underneath the doctrines I'd grown up with, something cellular. I didn't have to believe in extraterrestrials. I just had to recognize the structure, the familiarity, form versus function. It echoed the systems I'd been conditioned to recognize as sacred, a cosmology of vibrational evolution, densities of awareness, a journey of memory, forgetting, and choice. And what really gave me permission to appreciate my appreciation for Ra was neuroscience. I didn't need to believe in Ra's literal story to understand that my brain was responding to something familiar in pattern, not content, structure. This wasn't about aliens, it was about resonance, the architecture of meaning echoing through my nervous system. Joseph, Ra, and the spiral of becoming. When I learned about the way the raw material was channeled, how a few dedicated seekers gathered in quiet rooms, asking questions and receiving answers through trance and transmission, it reminded me of Joseph Smith. Joseph, the founder of Mormonism, didn't write the Book of Mormon in the traditional sense. He dictated it, often with his face buried in a hat, using what he called a seer stone to receive revelation. His scribes, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, his wife Emma, recorded what he spoke. That's not the version I was taught growing up, but over time, I came across enough historical documentation to understand and accept that this was his process. And when I finally allowed myself to look at that process through a less judgmental lens, something clicked. What if this was his way of channeling? What if the stone and the hat were like props in a ritual, a way to focus, to sink into an altered state, to give voice to something arising from within that he didn't fully understand? What if channeling wasn't about the forms, aliens or angels or deception, but a kind of neural or energetic coherence to function, a receptive state where fragments of personal, cultural, ancestral, and archetypal memory can come together in symbolic form? Because while the Book of Mormon and the Raw contact look wildly different on the surface, their functions, their invitations felt eerily familiar to me. Eternal progression, a premortal origin, a veil of forgetting, the importance of choice, the possibility of transformation, light, memory, and will, As a child, I was taught that spirits came to earth for two main reasons: to get a physical body and to be tested, to forget where we came from, make choices, and prove ourselves through mortal experience. I believed in a plan, a spiritual pre-existence, a veil, a life, a death, a resurrection, a judgment, and beyond that, eternal progression through kingdoms, telestial, terrestrial, celestial, degrees of glory that mirrored our choices, a layered universe arranged by vibrational alignment. We never used that language, but that was the meaning. That was the function. So when Ra spoke of densities, vibrational frequencies of consciousness unfolding through memory and polarity, it didn't feel like I was being asked to adopt a new belief. It felt like I was being given a new language for an old resonance. The layers, the veils, the test, the climb, all of it already lived in me. I'd grown up inside that cosmology. But now I could see it through a different lens, ones that didn't require dogma or obedience or judgment, one that allowed ambiguity, that honored nuance, that let mystery be mystery. It helped me realize something else, too. The channeling process wasn't about proving or disproving anything. It was about alignment. These weren't doctrines to argue over. They were patterns to explore. And the more I looked, the more I saw functional resonances lighting up something deep in my nervous system. Orion, polarity, and the forces that shape us. One of the most unexpected resonances came when I learned about Ra's concept of the Orion group. According to Ra, not all beings in the cosmos are oriented toward helping others. Some operate along what Ra calls the service to self path, manipulating, dominating, and deceiving for personal power. These are the Orion energies, entities that seek to control rather than liberate, that use fear and distortion to sway the development of younger civilizations like ours. And I couldn't help but think of Mormon cosmology again, specifically the 1/3 of the hosts of heaven who followed Lucifer, the evil spirits who were cast out, who came to earth not to gain a body but to oppose the plan of God, to tempt, distract, and confuse. I'd grown up with that idea. I'd internalized it. But it was always framed as a moral dualism, good versus evil, obedience versus rebellion. Ra offered something different. It wasn't good versus bad. It was orientation. Two ways of relating to the one. Service to self excludes, exploits, and separates, but still sees itself as part of the one. It's just the shadow of it. Even Ra says, all is service to the one, even if some paths involve ignoring or forgetting the rest of the one. That distinction mattered to me. It softened something, gave me language to talk about distortion without shame, to see the forces that push and pull on my nervous system, not as moral failings, but as vectors of coherence or fragmentation, attunements and misattunements. Because evolution, as Ra frames it, is about coherence. Densities rise when systems harmonize, when the inner relationships within a structure align. Just like atoms form molecules, and molecules form cells, and cells form a body, so too, beings can form greater unities, families, communities, cultures, civilizations, social memory complexes, a planetary mind, a solar network, a galactic self. And along the way, there are forces, internal and external, that nudge us toward alignment or away from it, that amplify our longing for unity or exploit our fear of separation. The Orion influence became a shorthand for me, a symbol, not of demons or literal aliens, but of dissonance, of distorted service, of the ways we use love to manipulate, truth to divide, power to protect the ego. It helped me identify those dynamics in myself, and instead of judging them, I could witness them, redirect them, watch them rewire. Mormonism had taught me to cast out evil spirits. Ra taught me to integrate distorted vectors and reattune. And that shift from judgment to integration was everything. The densities. I know, I can't say that word without thinking of George McFly. But Ra's framework describes 8 densities, vibrational layers of consciousness, like the octaves of a musical scale. The framework didn't ask for belief, it invited attunement. First density, earth, water, fire, air, the basic elements. Felt like the Big Bang, matter beginning to hum. Second density, growth, life without self-awareness. The turning toward light, plants, animals, bonding, the beginning of biological memory. Third density, self-awareness emerging through the veil. The emergence of I, the polarity between service to self and service to other, the birthplace of choice. Fourth density, love. The veil begins to lift, communication shifts, groups merge into social memory complexes, a kind of soul coherence begins. Fifth density, wisdom, discernment, solitude without separation, monastic clarity. Sixth density, integration, love and wisdom fuse, polarity dissolves, the self becomes aligned with source. Seventh density, completion, the edge of form, the preparation to dissolve again. Eighth density, rebirth, the beginning of a new octave, not linear, spiral. When I read this, I thought of Brahman, of cosmic dreaming, of the Big Bang not as a start, but a return. Ra's metaphysics felt like folklore and physics shaking hands. Polarity. And then came polarity. Ra's distinction between service to self and service to other wasn't about morality. It was about orientation. Every thought, every act, every impulse, leaning one way or another. Not right or wrong, just directional. And that changed everything. Because growing up Mormon, the central commandment I internalized was love one another. But even that love was layered with judgment. I remember having a crush on my first grade teacher, then feeling shame because she drank coffee, and coffee, in my religious system, made her unworthy. That innocent longing for connection got filtered through a lens of unworthiness. My system, my service to other instinct, was being distorted by a structure rooted in control. The very orientation I had toward love was being bent by fear. Years later, when I was a graduate student studying folklore at Indiana University, I heard a man pray in church, "Dear Heavenly Father, we are most humbled to be the most chosen of thy people." And I flinched. Humbled? Chosen? Does he know what those words actually mean? And it bothered me a lot. The contradiction landed like static in my nervous system. Now I have better language for it. That was polarity distortion. That was the Orion influence, as Ra would say. Spiritualized service to self dressed up in the costume of service to other. And it clicked. The ache I'd felt in church, the dissonance, it wasn't rebellion. It was resonance, misalignment, part of me recalibrating to something else. Ra didn't give me new values. It helped me see the values I already had more clearly. The structures I'd been tracking in therapy, myth, and neuroscience snapped into place. And suddenly, everything from earlier chapters, symptom, metaphor, spiral, started to shimmer with coherence. what Ra helped me see in what I already felt. Ra didn't replace my frameworks. It revealed their shape, helped me understand why the metaphors and symptoms I explored in earlier chapters felt so charged, because they were already resonating with these deeper structural patterns in my own nervous system. So when I speak of densities, I'm not just speculating, I'm remembering. Not in the literal sense, but in the way the body remembers, the way coherence feels. I see it in physics, forces aligning. I see it in chemistry, valences bonding. I see it in biology, cells collaborating. I see it in astrology, patterns mirroring patterns. I see it in therapy, systems integrating through awareness. I see it in my past faith, progression through relationships, through resonance. I see it in myself when my nervous system shifts from red to blue, from reactivity to coherence, from trauma to trust. Ra didn't make me a believer. It reminded me I already was one. Not in any one story, but in the structure beneath all stories. It helped me begin to see that we're not broken. We're rewiring. Always.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.